Thanks, Desiree. I appreciate it. And thanks, everybody, for making some time to join us for this session today. As Desiree mentioned, we're going to be talking about customer experience in the ECM world. And customer experience, you know, from our perspective and really from the industry perspective is all about the end user of what we in IT do to empower, right, and what that experience looks like. And so what we'll talk about today is that through the lens of things happening in the ECM world and the transitions that are taking place there and the situation that we increasingly find prevalent in the marketplace. We'll talk about the impact that creates generally on IT and on the users, and then talk a little bit about the resolution of that, the result, and taking a look at the current state and the future state of our environments. And then we'll transition a little bit to talking about specifically where Reveille can help inside of customer experience and close it out with a summary and open it up for questions. And please do feel free to add any and all questions that you have during the session. We've set it such that this short speaking part in the beginning of it leaves plenty of time for active questions there towards the end. So let's go ahead and jump right into the overall session. So the landscape for the ECM market is changing. We're seeing that both in our customer base as well as the prospects that we're talking to, and very certainly to the analysts that we speak with at firms like Gartner and Forrester. But the reason that traditionally ECM was born was as a back office content manager. And I'm not telling you anything that you don't already know, but where we came from is important as we talk about what's happening next, where it's that primary goal was about providing a platform for compliance. I needed a place for the ever-expanding and increasingly digital set of content assets in my enterprise that are regulated, that are guarded, that have workflow or need all of those things. We needed a place to go put all of that. We needed facilities to make those digital. We needed, increasingly we need collaboration tools, et cetera, and that's where ECM was born. But typically, historically, those have been single solutions from a single vendor. I made a decision at the enterprise level that one repository or a collection of repositories managed by a single vendor was the approach that we're going. And what we're seeing increasingly is that changing, going from ECM or enterprise content management as we all know it to content services as it's increasingly being talked about in the industry. And a content services platform really is the evolution of our existing content platform or content stack. And what that generally means for organizations is a consolidation of these content-related services. But one very important aspect of it is that it's multiple solutions from multiple vendors. So no longer do I just have one vendor like OpenText or IBM or Microsoft or Kofax or Box or Dropbox or any one of those in my organization. I find myself generally with many of those. Now, the great news about that is I can now play each one of those pieces to their strengths. If one of those repositories is better at a certain thing or works in a certain area better than it does in another, that's fantastic. We can apply that strength in there. And so what we're finding is that the different components and pieces that we used to call enterprise content management are now being put into this larger concept of a content services platform, where it's a system of record on the back end, even as complicated as it is, serving out services for an increasingly large number of applications or apps that are being created for users. Because distinct industry trends about everything we do being about the user and the appification of life in the enterprise, right? Driven by the consumerization of IT and how we're all so used to having these small, distinct, focused, and easy-to-use apps on our phone. So great trends happening in the market, but the evolution also causes a few other things, because when you add these complex systems that are getting increasingly so and increasingly chaotic with multiple solutions from countless vendors and all of these new requirements, a more demanding business user base that is no longer satisfied by being forced to log directly into the repository. They would much rather have an app that works on all the different devices that they want to come at this from, especially if they're consumers, but even increasingly employees and partners. Those new requirements are, in addition with everything else, is driving, without proper management, without proper control, visibility, et cetera, a poor experience. The users that we have in our enterprise, outside of our enterprise, that are using these applications are bound to have a bad experience, because I don't have visibility into what's going on. I don't have visibility into what they're doing and to what the operations or what the infrastructure is doing, both inside the app and out. And obviously, if everything is about the user and we have a poor user experience, that's bad news. And speaking of bad news, right, security is everybody's nightmare. And when you increase the number of moving parts in this CSP, in this content services platform in your enterprise, well, that creates gaps. It creates nooks and crannies for security holes to present themselves. And if you don't have that proper overall visibility, then you expose yourself to breaches, to data leakage, or worse. And we know that leads to everybody on this call that's in IT, our brethren that are there know that this creates a pretty chaotic environment for us every day. Because we are quite reactive and we move from one issue to the next issue to the next issue, whether that be a performance issue or a security issue, an adoption issue, an audit issue, anything along those lines. It keeps us hopping and generally feeling like we're always behind. And that eventually always leads to a loss in productivity. Simple examples of if I have a high volume capture process and I have people or automated processes waiting for the data to become digitized or become plucked off of forms, et cetera, so that I can do my work, if that isn't happening properly, well, then I don't have the productivity that I want, and thousands of other examples just like that. But you're probably, and rightfully thinking, don't I already have something that helps me with this? And the answer is yes, kinda. Everybody has general purpose tools in-house. Everybody went out and did the things that they needed to do and brought a general purpose or a horizontal tool to help them with either performance or analytics or something along those lines so that they can try and help get better visibility. Everybody that's done that knows that there's a but in there, and that is that there is no contextual understanding in those horizontal tools, meaning that they don't understand what's going on inside the application, speaking the language of that application. They do a nice job on the outside making sure that there's general health and stability in the system, but don't have the context to add to that. And they don't have the solution stack details, and by that I don't mean from the app server down through the hardware. I mean from the application up. How are the different components of my repository coming together? What's supposed to be talking to what, and how fast is that supposed to be occurring? And then user behavior. This is generally a huge gap when you're looking at general purpose, and that I don't have the visibility into exactly what my users are doing in the context of the application. So not just user A opens transaction B, but Jane checks out a document, right? So there's a contextual difference, and a significant one between, but when these two work together, you get the best of both. So let me try to explain that inside an analogy, and why content matters. And we're going to talk about it in the form of a house. a house that you'd probably like to not burn down. There are two different ways of looking at it. I can be outside that house, this is where the general purpose or horizontal tools would be outside that house, looking at it. And you can imagine, even if this guy isn't, walking his dog, whistling a tune, if he's actually on that bench staring directly at the house, he's going to know that there's a fire in that house when a window bursts, smoke and flames come billowing out. In other words, kind of a bit too late. But if instead we can move to inside the house, and we have somebody specifically trained, ready with a fire hose, and we arm her with sensors, right? We, all over the house, whether they be smoke sensors or air quality sensors or anything along those lines that are all connected centrally, and give access to alarms and to let folks know what's going on from inside that house. And she has a distinct understanding of the floor plan, of how things flow inside of that house. She is in a much better position of understanding when leading indicators to fire begin to occur versus being outside that house, looking in and waiting for that window to come blowing out with smoke. So let's transition back from the analogy to the reality of what fire is in that case. Right, well, there are the four things that I mentioned before that are the result of the situation we find ourselves in as we move to a content services platform approach. It's the poor experience, and poor experience creates angry users, and angry users create bad days for an already chaotic IT. Security holes create, at best, something for IT to chase, at worst, something for PR to chase, and lost productivity impacts everything, right? But if I have the context and the complete and total understanding of what's going on in my CSP, then I can avoid all of this fire, and I can do it in a way that's a lot cleaner and more simple. So good is the enemy of great, and the reason for the title here is because you really need to surround everything that you're doing. You can't just focus on performance. You can't just focus on security. You can't just focus on the low-level infrastructure. You really need to focus on all of that, or you're going to be stuck not being as great as you can be and not having the CSP that you and your users deserve. So you have experience, and we've already talked a fair amount about that, and we'll dig into that further in slides. Behavior, and that's actually the topic of the next webinar that's coming out next month. And this is all about what users are doing in the system and what we can do to tell you more about it, not just from a performance perspective and not just from an adoption perspective. And we can't forget operations. We can't forget the infrastructure upon which these applications are running, and we can't forget the health of the applications themselves. We really have to have data from inside the app, outside the app, and what the users are doing to bring a complete and total experience. And that is where Reveille fits. So does customer experience really matter? And I don't really think that is a genuine question any longer. If you look at some of the statistics that we pulled together from blogs and other articles, surveys showing 52% of users saying that a bad mobile experience makes them less likely to engage. And most folks would generally think that that's probably a consumer example. It's not necessarily a consumer example. As an enterprise, we can spend a ton of time creating these applications, but if they're not adopted and if they're not usable, they won't be adopted. And if they're not adopted, then why did we go through the effort to begin with? 9 out of 10 folks say being able to access that content that we are spending so much time creating this CSP to manage, they want to be able to do that wherever they want. And 83% say a seamless experience across all these different devices is important. And why that's interesting in our context is it creates a load on IT, and it creates more chaos in the system. And so if we don't have something to calm that chaos, then we're in bad shape. So the bottom line is that CX can affect and frustrate your users to the point where it's not just lost productivity, it's actually lost revenue. So, we need to ensure the speed, consistency, and user adoption of these applications. Adoption being critically important, because if I am spending hundreds of thousands or even tens of thousands of dollars to create an app or a series of apps, if nobody's using them, then I've really wasted my money. All right, so how do we quantify customer experience? It would be great to be able to ask my CSP a series of questions. Are all the components of my platform performing properly? What features are being used and are they performing well? So inside the application, are they using a certain feature? Are they not using certain features? And how well are those performing? Because that has a distinct impact on customer experience. Are they having a good overall experience? Are my users using the apps in the way that I intended? Are they hitting the transactions that I expect them to hit? Or are they actually skipping those, which tells me I have a usability problem? How's the app performing from the user's perspective? This is pretty key. Not from the infrastructure's perspective, right? Storage looks great, CPU looks great, network's not showing any issues, but my users are still angry and they're still calling me. Why? And we have to look at it from the end user's perspective to truly quantify CX. At what rate are the applications being adopted? Is my project successful? And what are the current performance trends of my content stack? That's kind of key, because I need to know those things for being able to shift over time to sustainably operating that overall environment. So let's dig in and talk about the two different disciplines inside of customer experience that Reveille enables. The first and foremost is performance. And any of the customers of Reveille that are on the line right now know this is where we have focused our energy for the last many, many years. With out-of-the-box KPIs, best practice KPIs, so that you understand without having to spend a lot of time in the solution to whether you're doing well or whether you're not doing well. And then we add to that alerting and remediation, whether that be automated or manual, so you can stay ahead of things on a performance front. And to that, we add adoption and a number of others that we'll discuss in the rest of this webinar series. This one is adoption, having access to real-time end-user transactions and application adoption data. If you think about what an app is a series of functions that a user can do. Those functions themselves are a bundle of transactions. We see user transactions going across the wire, and we can reconstruct those and understand exactly what the user is doing. Again, not user A opens transaction B, but Joe checks out a document. Right? And if I add all of those together and I know what transactions are in the application, then I can give you very granular information about the usage of that app and the adoption of that app. So adoption. Right, so exploring the depths of user experience. You can see a screenshot from Reveille 8 that's currently in development and will be out shortly. What we're doing there is showing an overall usage from a transactional status of a particular application, or even of all my applications. Being able to map out the performance of applications. You can see a shot from our existing product that's still under development now for kind of matching to the new look and feel, but you can certainly see in that list the very specific transactions that we're watching. Again, not generic, adding context to what we're doing. And then from a performance perspective, all folks that have been with us for a while understand that we've been in this space. What we're doing in Reveille 8 to really up-level what we've done in performance is spending a lot of time in visualization and making it very simple to create very powerful and compelling visualizations of the data that we're gathering. So we can see how we're doing against our customer experience metrics, what the system is looking like overall, or very specifically down at an application or a transaction level, and really looking at this from the user's perspective, because it is all about the experience that they have with what it is that I'm doing. And so, in the case of this shot, we're taking a look very specifically at the transactional volume across a particular application. So let's talk quickly about how all of this works. And so I'm going to walk through this graphic to give you an idea of where Reveille fits into your environment and how we do what we do. And I'll orient you and ask that you take your eyes down to the lower right-hand corner in the gray box called Sources, because that's basically where it starts and where everything flows through. It's where your content lives, and it's the applications that are managing it. So solutions from vendors like OpenText and Microsoft, Kofax, IBM, Box, and others. What we're doing in that orange area that we call harvesting is we're pulling information out of those sources. You can also see users in that gray box, and that just represents the fact that we're gathering user data about what's happening with those sources as well. And so it's important to note at the harvest stage, we are inside the application grabbing information, we're outside the application, and we're underneath the application and watching what the users are doing. And in many cases, with several of these applications, we have 10 to 15 different methods by which we gather information. That's an important distinction because that's where context comes from. And we pull all of that into our own data store, and that's the basis from which we analyze this data. And during in that yellow phase of analyze, we're distilling that information down into insight, right? We're taking that massive amount of data that's coming in, and we're distilling it down into information that's actionable. You'll see that yellow goes both to visualize as well as to act, and we'll talk about act in a minute. But it is important to note that during the analyze phase, in a completely automated fashion, as we notice things that are out of whack, we can remediate, we can act, we can respond. But as we take that insight, we now need to be able to visualize that to a series of clients. And those clients can be on any device. And this is where those screenshots that I just took you through are. This is where we spend the time to create those simple, compelling, informative, actionable visualizations and dashboards that tell you what's going on in your CSP, that then allow you to act. And that's what happens next. Whether it's coming automated from the analyze phase or manual from the visualize phase, we have encapsulated not only the ability to take information out of these sources, but also have activity occur inside of them. So if I need to temporarily suspend somebody's access, I can do that. And our customers don't need to know exactly all the different things that need to happen in order to do that. We've encapsulated a lot of that intelligence. If we need to cycle an application server, we can do that. So it's in the app, outside the app, and all the way around it. And this is a very circular or cyclical process. Right? Once we've done that, we're back down to harvesting again, which is a continual process, and then analyze, visualize, and act. Right, so that's where we fit. That's how it works, and what you will be seeing from us in Reveille 8 and beyond. So in summary, your CSP is complex and evolving. Right? You're moving from just one or two enterprise content management products or solutions into more of a mix, whether that be purposefully done because you want to play to the strength of a particular vendor, or through acquisition or other reasons. And that is becoming more complicated as it evolves. And with that comes an increase in challenges and chaos. General purpose tools are necessary and exist, but they're incomplete. And Reveille can inform with context your existing systems and fit very well right alongside. It's important to be able to get ahead of the fire, and the way to do that is with the context. And customer experience ultimately affects your bottom line. So performance and adoption context, right? If we add that there, that brings intelligence to customer experience. Without that context, I am flying a bit blind. I am outside the house waiting for the window to explode. And this is another important piece, which is intelligence without action isn't useful. And if you think about that for a second, whether it be whatever system in your environment that's telling you something that is going on, if it doesn't give you the ability to act upon it, it's not terribly useful. Right, so you really need to marry both the intelligence with the action. And if you take a look at, our new logo and our tagline, it's about active insight. Right, the insight is that intelligence, and the active part is being able to do something about it. And fundamentally, Reveille is here to help. All the things that we just went through here, all of the issues, all of the transitions, bringing in context, Reveille is in a position to help your organization, not just as we have done traditionally from a performance perspective, but increasingly not only from application adoption, but in other areas that you'll continue to hear about from us. So with that, I'll stop and hope that this has been informative and has created a series of questions that I'm happy to go through and answer. So I'll turn it back over to you, Desiree, for moderating that.
Thanks, Sean. So now we'll go ahead and take some time for questions. Just a reminder, please make sure to type your questions in the Q&A box on the right-hand side of your screen. Looks like we have a few already. Sean, Casey asks, you've talked about app adoption and user information. I still don't get how that works.
Okay. I can see that. So basically, how I'm taking the question is, I'm skeptical. How can you provide information about application adoption from your vantage point, not being inside the application of the CSP and not being in the app that's created to leverage it? And the answer is in the fact that we are sitting on the wire and we're seeing the user transactions flowing in your network, and we're plucking out the ones that are interesting in the context of your CSP, and we are reconstructing them start to finish and recording it, which means that not only are we able to see full cycle times on what the transactions are, but we also understand what people are doing, and we can get to behavior from that. So if at the base level, I understand all the transactions that are flowing in my network and in my environment, and then I add to that some context around what transactions are a part of which applications, then I know which applications are being adopted. And even more than that, inside those applications, I can even tell you what parts, hence what transactions are actually hit more than others. So what we're doing is we're taking all of that user transactional data and we are building up from that to give you a view into the adoption of the app, the performance from the end user's perspective at a both granular as well as high level. So hopefully that answers that question.
Okay, great. Terrence asks, I am an existing Reveille customer. I see a bunch of new stuff here. Are you all leaning away from performance?
Okay, great question. And I'll make the first part of it very, very short, and the answer is no, absolutely not. We are not leaning away from performance. We have spent a very long time building up a lot of knowledge in the area of performance. And frankly, we believe that even ongoing, that the first place our customers, our new customers, will focus their energy is solving the performance problem that they're facing. We will continue to pour the more blood, sweat, and tear into making sure that we are the sharpest tool that you have to solve that particular problem. But it's in the context of an overall solution. So that we are expanding what we're able to do beyond just performance, because the data that we've been gathering along with the data that we're now gathering allows us to allow you to ask a whole wide, varied list of questions of your CSP, some in the customer experience area that we went through in the presentation, and some elsewhere. So the longer version is what I just went over, but the short version is no, we're not leaning away from performance at all.
Okay, thanks, Sean. So the next question comes from Kelly. She says, the screenshots look entirely new. Is this a new product?
Well, no. The, good eye, what we have done there were a couple of themes that we focused on for Reveille 8. Being more modern and adding things like MongoDB support because of the volume and type of the data that's coming in through both the user channel as well as the operations channel. But another very, very significant theme was spending time on visualization and making the product more, not just visually interesting to use, but just more modern from a responsive UI that works across all devices. So what we've done, kind of underneath the covers, what we've done is we have gone through the system and created RESTful APIs here, there, and everywhere. And then we've used that new infrastructural or architectural enablement to create some very powerful visualizations on the front end. So what you're seeing is the change on the front end, but that it also shows some changes on the back end. So it's not a new product, but it is a significantly enhanced product, and we're very proud to be coming out with it.
Okay, great. So it looks like we've covered all of your questions. Sean, is there anything else you wanted to cover before I wrap up?
I would. Thanks, Desiree. So the last two things. One, first, thank you very much for your time. I hope that you have found it informative, and if you do have additional questions, please do get in touch. And the second thing is, and I alluded to this a couple of times, this is the first part of a three-part webinar series. This one being on customer experience. The next one, which will be at the beginning of next month, will be on user behavior. And then a month from then, we'll be having one on operations. So we would love to see everybody come back and see more about each one of those pillars of our overall product, the 3 pillars of our overall product that represent the 7 disciplines that we're bringing to market in Reveille 8. So there will be emails going out as a follow-up to this session, which will include the recording that we've made today, with a link to register for those. Or you can always go just to our homepage, and it'll be advertised right there, front and center underneath the video. So that's all I have. Thanks, everybody, for your time. And Desiree, thank you so much for the moderation.
Thanks, Sean. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next time.